welcome to this week's edition of Round Table Talk. This evening we are pleased to welcome three special guests in the persons of Professor Gary Michael Denny, my sixth form schoolmate. We also have historian Dr. Cleve Scott. It sure feels different because on the last several occasions when we had an opportunity to chat, we were doing so via Zoom. So for the first time, we are all in the studio today. We also have Dr. Grace Carrington, who is a research fellow at the University College London with us today. And we'll be talking about the recent passing of the head of the Commonwealth and head of the monarchy and why we should really care. We'll also be talking a little bit about republicanism, and we'll also question and examine whether or not the reparations issue should be firmly on the agenda, as well as the constitutional change in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Welcome again. We know who you guys are, so I'm going to start by asking Dr. Carrington to tell us who she is and what brings her on the ground in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Sure, thank you. So I'm a historian, as you said, at University College London. At the moment, the book I'm working on is on decolonisation and republicanism in the Caribbean, and is part of a wider project with researchers based in the UK and also at Cave Hill in Barbados, looking at the British monarchy, specifically Queen Elizabeth, and the relationship with the Caribbean from the 1950s right up to present day, campaigns for republicanism, calls for reparations from the monarchy. So the whole project kind of encompasses all of that.
Okay, and I know Dr. Scott is working on that project with you, so later on we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's get this discussion going. Head of the Commonwealth, the head of the monarchy, a new head has taken over. Should we care? And what are the implications for us, not only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but in the rest of the region?
Well, we are institutionally bound. Once we are part of the Commonwealth, and once we remain part of the empire, where the monarchy, the British monarchy, constitutes our head of state, then we are institutionally bound to care. Okay, so that one is easily answered. As to what form that care should take, which is to raising questions as whether we should remain in the empire or whether we should leave. Now, that's a very important question, and I suppose we're going to have room to discuss that. But as to the first question, should we care? We have no choice, because since we are part of we're in the Commonwealth, and the British monarchy is also our monarchy, then we have no choice but to have some concern about this.
Dr. Scott?
The fact is, with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and the ascension of King Charles III, that we in St. Vincent and Grenadines, I'm certain, I haven't seen it, I haven't heard it, but there must be some document that our authorities have signed to recognize him as the head of the Commonwealth. Because under our Constitution, the Governor General is now his representative. And wherever there is something called Her Majesty's, it will have to be changed to His Majesty's. So as far as I am aware, Teresa, I don't know if you know different, that the prisons in St. Vincent are called Her Majesty's prisons. And so all of these institutions, the emblems, let's call it the emblems, or the insignia, which is the sophisticated terminology, will have to change. A good friend of mine put on Facebook, social media recently, that we have all these post boxes around Kingston at ER2. And what are we going to do with them? I hope we don't throw them in the sea. We can put them in the museums because they're important material culture. But the reality is, as Dr. Denny indicated, we are part of the Commonwealth. We are not a republic nation like Barbados, like Guyana, like Dominica. And certainly the question is, how much longer are we willing to continue with the monarchy?
Okay, and you can answer that question. Should we? How much longer should we?
Well, I think Dr. Denny should come first, Dr. Denny.
Well, you know, I'm not a monarchist. You know, I'm anti-monarchist. I don't even think the British should have a monarchy, but at least I would accept the principle that that people should choose how they're governed. And so if the British consent, to having a monarchy, even though I am on principle opposed to the idea that your birth should somehow award you with all kinds of privileges and power and money, because that's it. The monarchy is a caste system. You're born into a family, and by virtue of belonging to that family, all kinds of rights, privileges, and all kinds of other wonderful things befall you, and so on, and your children into perpetuity. I think merit should be the governing principle of all societies, that you should work for whatever you have. So so a monarchy, a hereditary monarchy violates all of that completely. But if the British wants to do that, they can do that. Now in Vinci-land, that's a very different story, because we were inherited. We inherited the monarchy. We were part of British colonial possessions. We were so this dominion that the British exercised over St. Vincent and over a vast empire, which has now been pretty much shrunken to a few remaining places. We are simply part of that legacy. We didn't exercise a choice. So we didn't choose to become part of the monarchy in any meaningful sense. And so if you were to put that question to Vincentians, maybe they would decide that they want to be part of the monarchy. I would choose not to.
Well, for me, the fact is that when we speak about British colonization in the region, it is a legacy of exploitation. Exploitation to the core. Everything that goes with it, racism, the removal of resources. St. Vincent and the Grenadines had 140-something estates during the height of the sugar plantation complex. And the vast majority of these owners, they never set foot in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They lived in luxury. And when the British were ready to get rid of us, in 1979, we were sent off without anything. The only thing I remember we getting probably is an old plane and an old boat. And so we have governments in the 21st century fighting to build a hospital, and people blame the government, but they don't understand these are the legacies of the British Empire. And the British Empire is represented by the British Crown. Colonization, not only in Britain, across the entire Caribbean, has to do with the Crown. Isabella and Ferdinand, they sent Columbus. And Columbus claimed these places in the name of the British Crown, of the Spanish Crown. But you understand the point I'm making, that I don't see why we must continue. Because even when the British were here, we talk about the end of slavery. When emancipation came, we were given a landless emancipation. They just tell, okay, slavery, don't go by your business. And if you go and squat on a piece of land, they chase you. Then independence come, and they give you too less independence. I think right now we have been loitering too long on colonial premises, as Walter Errol Barrow, former late Prime Minister Barbados, said. We have been loitering for too long. You could imagine we are here in Victoria Park. Victoria Park? Come on. It's time we get rid of these legacies of colonialism, Teresa.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add here, if you go back to the beginnings of the Vincentian story, okay, before British, French, any European touch on Vincentian land, Vincentian people were sovereign people, okay, and the British monarchy, one of the other words that the monarchy used to describe itself is sovereign. So it means that we're not sovereign, because once we are under the monarchy, sovereignty resides within the monarchy. But the first struggle that we have encompassed this land, and that unfolded for 300 years was a struggle for sovereignty, for the indigenous peoples to maintain their capacity to rule St. Vincent, live their lives free of the intervention of any power, whether it be British, French, Spanish, anyone whatsoever. So in that sense, the very battles which they fought, okay, and fought for 300 years to have that sovereignty by submitting to the British monarchy, we are in essence, kind of betraying that history. And so we can go back to the very beginning to see that sovereignty is a fundamental concept as to how free people should live their lives. And the British sovereign is the sovereign of St. Vincent.
Your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, firstly, in 2022, to have a head of state who's not from St. Vincent, to have, the British monarchy as head of state seems anachronistic. And then I think it will be really interesting to see what happens now. I've been speaking to people about their impressions of Queen Elizabeth and now of Charles. And my sense is that people have very different impressions of them, that he's much less popular. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that feeds into debates about the monarchy here.
Okay, we'll take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk about what should happen next.
I am Dr. Gerald Thompson, an infectious disease specialist. I'm inviting you every week to join our program, Healthy Choices, Healthy Actions, a health program that you need to see.
Welcome back. Gentlemen, what should be our next move? We know that we have had failed efforts at constitutional reform in this country several years back. What do you think should happen now?
Yeah, I think I think the comparison is useful, but at the same time, there are some limitations that we should acknowledge. That failed constitutional reform, when measured against costs, ending our place within the British Empire, there were many elements to that constitutional reform. I think if we put one question before the Vincentian public, that is a vastly different kind of political context. One single question: should we remain part of the monarchy? I also think that that both political parties can in fact agree, even before that question goes to the public, that they support this in its entirety. And so, and if such a thing were to take place, if Friday and Dr. Friday and Dr. Gonsalves were to lead their parties to that position, then it seems to me you probably have an overwhelming support among the Vincentian people. I think what we don't want to have, as took place in the last referendum, is where it became a test of political strength between the competing parties. What you want is a test of the opinion of Vincentians, okay? And I think if it is framed differently, we might very well get that answer. But of course, I am speculating here as to what the public thinks.
For me, the fact is that King Charles III is an unknown entity in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Many of us grew up hearing about Queen Elizabeth II. She has been, or she had been on the throne for 70 years. And I don't think any of us in here are 70. Right?
Not quite.
So that we grew up with our parents showing appreciation. In fact, I would say that the typical dress of a Vincentian woman of class for many decades was a hat like the Queen and those things they put around your neck. They call them, Teresa, pearls, right? So that the Queen Elizabeth II became symbolic of class and attire and dress. Unfortunately, for 70 years she evaded substantial controversy, save and except perhaps the Mighty Sparrow, Philip My Day, and A Man in the Bedroom. And there's another calypso, the Queen singing calypso and singing Bam Bam Lulu and so on. But those are just humor as we know it in the Caribbean. And therefore, I don't think the average Vincentian would see the usefulness or even the necessity, to put it another way, of continuing with Philip. And, sorry, not with Philip, but King Charles III. And from my perspective, I cannot foresee, and history have to prove me wrong, why both the opposition and the government would not find it useful to agree on a simple thing. Get rid of Philip. So I keep saying Philip, I don't know why. Because I said the Queen in my bedroom. But get the point. Get rid of King Charles III.
So do you foresee a problem with getting both parties to come to this agreement?
I can't fathom it. I can't see why you would have a problem. A simple thing. Replace, just like as Barbados did, replace the Governor General with a homegrown president, which basically does the same thing, exercise the same functions and powers. A simple thing as that. I don't see the difficulty. History have to prove me wrong.
For those of us who may not be familiar, what exactly is republicanism? What does it entail?
Well, Grace is the expert in republicanism, so Grace will answer that.
So I suppose in the St. Vincent context, it would be, removing the British monarch as head of state. It's interesting when you look at the 8 countries in the Caribbean that still have the Queen as head of state and the different routes that are available, different constitutional routes that are available to republicanism, to removing now the King Charles as head of state. So if you look at, obviously Barbados didn't need a referendum because of their constitution in order to remove the monarchy. Belize is the only other country that is also able to do that. So they could become a republic through a parliamentary bill. For the other countries, like St. Vincent, you need a referendum. For somewhere like Jamaica, you only need a simple majority, more than 50% in the referendum to become a republic. The 3 countries where it is most difficult to become a republic is St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, and also Grenada, because you need that 67%, that 2/3 majority in a referendum. So the routes to republicanism are slightly different in the different countries.
Okay, what are the different routes to republicanism? Just those 2?
In terms of the referendum, so it's either a referendum or in Belize, the only country that can do this, if the party in power pushed through a parliamentary bill like they did in Barbados, you wouldn't need a referendum in order to make that kind of constitutional change.
How do you think we can get the public to support this idea, this concept? What needs to be done?
I think the political parties play a pivotal role in this regard. Vincentians are pretty much, as of this moment, you know, locked into their parties. So if the parties agree, then the public is not going to, you know, disagree. So, so to me, you know, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, they can in fact hold hands and take us across the border. That, and if both of them recognize that this is something that is in the national interest of St. Vincent, that it is protective of the idea of sovereignty for future generations, it repairs a past where you know we were once sovereign and we lost that. So it seems to me that Dr. Friday and Dr. Gonsalves, that they have it within their power to tell to state as a specific principle of their parties, this is what we will do, and we can, you know, and I don't see, you know, as Dr. Scott has indicated, some kind of fundamental opposition in St. Vincent to you know, to having a Vincentian stand as, you know, the person presiding over ceremonial functions, etc., and so on. As you know, in theory, we do now, except with the shadow of the monarchy lingering over that person.
Okay.
Well, times change, people's change. The last referendum was about 10 years ago. And if you were 10 years old 10 years ago, you are now able to vote. And 10 years ago, people aged 80, 90 plus, some of them most likely have left us, right? And I would say that, and that's simple historical fact, you will have now a new dispensation. And a new dispensation which should be more informed, more educated, and also more anti-colonial. Because they must have asked themselves, especially at a time like this, when we had to declare a period of mourning, when people thought they were going to get a public holiday, and so on. When people see you have to swear to the Queen, heirs, and successors, as Dr. Denny said, you are committing yourself and your people into perpetuity. And why are you doing that to people who abuse you as colonial citizens? And the fact is that we are still very young independent nations. I was on Independence Parade in 1979 right in Victoria Park, and I don't think I look like an old man. So we are fairly young, and we need to stop loitering on colonial premises.
Interesting quote. We need to stop loitering on colonial premises. This brings me to the research that you are doing.
Yeah.
I know Dr. Scott is working with you on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Visible Crumb Project. Tell us about the background to this project and why is it an important initiative at this particular time?
Yeah, so the wider project looks at specifically at Queen Elizabeth and the relationship between the British monarchy and the Caribbean. There are sort of different aspects of the project. Some researchers on the project looking more at public opinion, at contemporary politics. As I mentioned, my part of the research is looking at a kind of longer period of decolonisation, looking at the moment of independence, countries like Dominica that became republics at independence, and looking comparatively across the Caribbean. As I said, it's sort of a wider project of researchers in London and in the Caribbean, and Dr. Scott as well.
Right. Keyville, University of the West Indies at Keyville is part of this project. At Keyville so far, under the leadership of Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles, with the assistance of Professor in Management, Dwayne Devonish, they did a survey in the lead up to the Barbados move to Republic, questioning people and this move. I am leading another section on oral history through the Department of History and Philosophy. We are going to 14 Caribbean countries, Commonwealth Caribbean countries, and we are interviewing people, recording their expressions and so on video and audio, and we would have access to that on how people see the Queen and the Crown. In other words, what benefits they thought the Crown brought, what they found important or interesting, and similarly, how they feel about it today. So that's what the project is all about. Incidentally, the project was conceived in anticipation of the 70th anniversary of our reign, and we were always very concerned whether or not she would live to that point, and fortunately for us, she lived until that moment. So we are at a very interesting juncture with this project because we are still at it and the Queen has passed.
Who are some of the people you've been talking with in the country?
Yeah, so earlier in the summer, I was in Barbados talking to politicians, political activists, also just members of the public about their impressions of the Queen and also their impressions of the transition to Republic. And then since I've been in St Vincent, again I've spoken to some political activists, some politicians, different members of the public to try and get a sense of, I think the interesting thing for me was that question of constitutional reform and the referendum. Is that a political possibility for St Vincent in the future? That was the really key thing that I was interested in.
Okay, when we come back from our second break, we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you've been discovering so far. Back in just a moment. Welcome back. Before we took the break, we were about to talk about some of the findings of your research here on Ireland so far.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really stood out for me was that while there might have been some sense of fondness or sentimentality around the figure of the Queen, I haven't spoken to anyone either in Barbados or St Vincent who have really strong feelings about Charles. It was interesting, the opinion survey that Dr. Scott mentioned found, I think it was around 12% of respondents had a favourable opinion of Charles. That was in Barbados. Speaking to people in St Vincent, I've found kind of similar impressions. So I think that transition to a new monarch will be really, really interesting in the coming months, thinking forward to the coronation next year. Interesting to see what impressions there are of him as a new king.
Okay. We were talking during the break about some of the interesting things about the monarchy.
Yes, I was, the Queen lived long, 70 years. And what I found, interesting, and I don't have necessarily an answer as to what we can do with it, but she linked 100 years together, because the first Prime Minister with whom she was attached, which is Churchill, was born 100 years earlier than this current Prime Minister, with whom she she helped to anoint or that person into the new position as Prime Minister. And so she stands as that link between 100 years of history. And so I have wondered, in the instance of St. Vincent in particular, of course, but it does has value for the broader Caribbean. How can we have any kind of figure or a particular kind of event, something that has the strength of that historical memory that gives us gives shape to our collective identity as a people, that go beyond simply we live in this moment, but connects the present, the past, and the future in a manner that she was able to connect 100 years together just by her very presence. And I think that is important as a sense of identity, that, that those generations gone and those generations alive today must have, some kind of, statue of, some statutory figure or, memories, collective memories that, link us together. And so she was a living embodiment of that relationship between the present and the past. And I would like us to have something similar in St. Vincent.
Well, the question of the currency, the Eastern Caribbean dollar, continuing to keep our image is one that we need to pay attention to. And frankly speaking, I don't see why we need to go from Queen Elizabeth to the King. We have so many heroes and heroines across the Caribbean, from the Eastern Caribbean, who should go there. We have Chateau as our first national hero. Why we don't put Chateau in one of those? We have other persons who we are calling, and we have outstanding sports people and so on. A person like Ivy Richards, Vivian Richards, I don't think anybody in the Eastern Caribbean would say they shouldn't put Vivian Richards there. I mean, I will repeat it. We need to stop loitering on colonial property. And to be more precise, according to Harold Barrow, after closing time, the British have closed the shop long, and we're still here. The CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, is another thing. What are we waiting on? We are waiting on... Look, the first time I went to England, they asked me, why you come here for? Why you come here for? What is your reason for being here? They didn't say to me, welcome, my loyal and faithful son from the Commonwealth.
Welcome home.
Welcome home. They didn't tell me that. No, they did not tell me that. And from that moment, right? In fact, Professor Vereen Shepherd, who is the head of the Center for Reparations of the University of the West Indies at Mona campus, she posted on her Facebook page earlier this week that she went to the British Library and they gave her permission to use the library for 2 years only. And she said to them, according to her, but we have the same king. And he said, sorry, but you are not British, so you cannot have indefinite access. The fact is, there's no significant benefit. There's none. There ain't none. There ain't like the days you would have a passport that say British citizen and you go to England and you would say that. But that's another story where how they treat people in the Windrush. It's time we finish with this thing, man. Time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Scott makes an excellent point as to one of the mechanisms through which we can link the present and the past. Whether it's Viv Richards or Garfield Sobers or any of these great players, because we continue to play cricket. So, and of course, Chateau and other forms of national heroes, because that's what I'm saying, that this kind of collective memory that links the present and the past, that our people know that this is the road we have traversed. These are the people who have helped to bring us to this point. This is the world that we live in, based upon what came before. I think that's a mechanism that could allow us, to have
the
that
fact
kind
is,
of...
this is our civilization.
Yes.
This is our Caribbean civilization, and we need to own it and celebrate it.
Are there any other mechanisms that we can use to connect that future and that past?
Well, the reality is that we are all part of the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth have its own institutions, like the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Commonwealth Youth Program, which I'm a graduate of. I did Youth and Development Studies under the Commonwealth Youth Program. I mean, most of St. Vincent and the Grenadines know I was a cadet officer, and the Army Cadet movement came from the UK. We have the Boy Scouts, we have the Girl Guides. We are not saying that British colonialism did not create institutions which are worthy to celebrate, but we are saying that we are at this moment where we should be able to take what we want and get rid of it, which is not good. And this notion of monarchy, when nobody in St. Vincent and Grenadines could ever become king or queen. Never. No black man from this part of the world, I don't even think a black man ever, right, could get there. And people could read between the lines because we follow in social media and we know what is going on and we read it in between the lines. So it's time that we move on.
Okay, what about the whole question of reparations? How important is it for us to get that issue firmly back on the Caribbean agenda?
Well, I would start the ball rolling. I mentioned King Charles. With the transition in Barbados to republicanism, he was invited and he made a speech. And to be honest, I was impressed because in this speech, he said, we recognize that slavery is a dark era that was not good. But as Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, the chair of the Caribbean Reparations Commission, would said, he stopped short of making the statement we want to hear, which is an apology. Anytime the British Crown give an apology, it will open the floodgate because reparation is a legal issue. Once you have admitted that you have done something wrong, which is you apologize. You hit somebody, you say, sorry. It means you recognize you hit them, you did something wrong. If you didn't think you hit the person, or you don't want to say you hit the person, you say, me not do that. Me not do that. Me not really talk about. But from the time you say me sorry, it means that you have admitted that you are wrong. So the king, although he, in a kind of way, saying, yes, slavery was not good, he stopped short of offering an apology. But the reparation movement will continue. It might not succeed in our lifetime, but the fact is it is gaining momentum. Universities all across the UK have begun to acknowledge. That's why Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves is currently in Wales, and he got an honorary doctorate. And we have Vincentian students studying there, and all of that is part of this institutional recognition that people from Wales own estates in St. Vincent, and they got money to build big houses. But it's not only from Wales, it's from Scotland and from Ireland and so on in England.
Yeah, and reparations is beyond, simply, a dollar amount, designed to acknowledge wrongs in the past. Reparations, and the reason why this conversation would continue, is also about a transformation of conscience, across generations. And so that where we stand now having this conversation, sitting in this studio, if we were 50 years ago, we're not having this conversation, sitting in the studio. And the kinds of scholarships that, we receive from the University of Wales and elsewhere. So in that sense, we have to see reparations also as a broader movement involving, a consciousness arising within the former colonial powers, which could persuade their citizens in this modern world to act not as if they were responsible for the wrongs of the past, but to act as if they acknowledge that there were wrongs done and that they can act in ways now that ensure that they seek redemption. They seek to sit on a level playing field of equal rights, of shared conscience, and so on. So I think that that reparations, narrowly construed, may be seen as you give me X number of dollars for why harm done in the past, but more broadly imagined, it ultimately engages the transformation in the conscience of these people.
What we want our citizens to recognize is that as young post-colonial states, a lot of the challenges we have is a result of slavery, indentureship, and colonization as a whole. The fact is, when we don't have proper hospitals and proper schools, when we don't have highly trained people, when we too can't put a rocket in space, when we too can't make a car engine, it is not because our people lack this capacity. It's because we have been underdeveloped. And I'll use the title of two books by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. Very good text for those who would like to read. But pay attention to the title. The first one is Britain's Black Debt. That Britain, the collection, England, Wales, Scotland, and so on, that they worked generations of black people. Generations of black people. And Dr. Denny and myself, along with Dr. Adrian Fraser and Dr. Arnold Thomas, we are working on 2 volumes. We have already written the chapters on slavery and enslavement, and we have more knowledge of what happened in St. Vincent and the Grenadines than ever on the various plantations, estates all across, and the wickedness that was done to black people. Wickedness.
That's a good word.
Right? To black people. But the reality is that when you think you have made enough, you leave and you leave the cupboard empty. You didn't even leave a little thing and say, well, boy, a friend of mine does use the word manners bit. He was by me this week and he keep talking about manners bit. They didn't leave Teresa didn't leave a little manners bit. They didn't say, well, y'all hold a little piece. And reparations is part of this process to try to get the manners bit, the little piece. But it is not just about money. It is about recognizing that all the years you're telling me that black people are ugly. We're going with a big nose and we still now inherit that and we watch one another. Boy, that nose in there. You're only black hair. All of that damage, that psychological damage that we have to come now and correct. These are the kinds of things we need support for.
We'll take a final break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we repair the past, to use your words. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Earlier on, we spoke about the need for an apology, the need for acknowledgement of the wrongs that were done. Do you really foresee this happening? Any of you?
Well, again, you know, none of us are prophets, so we can begin there, but we are historians, okay? And we can look back at the past. And where we are now is vastly different from where we were 100 years ago. And this didn't happen by chance. This happened through protests, through the articulation of principles of conscience, by which all humanity should be judged. It happened through historical research. It happened through the voices of the oppressed, of the children and the descendants, finding greater place to lay out a vision of what the past had been like. I mean, Eric Williams, from Dr. Eric Williams, so many years ago, that book that Agent Fraser had introduced us to, Capitalism and Slavery. I mean, he just revolutionized the whole notion as to the responsibility of the enslavers for profiting from slavery. Walter Rodney in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. These are Caribbean men who laid fundamental foundations, so that allow us to make the claim for reparations and so on. And so, if we use the past as a way to understand how the future might unfold, not something we can guarantee, but we can say that where we are intellectually and politically and ideologically in this moment is vastly different from where we were 50 plus, 60, 70 years ago. And so what that commands is that we continue with this labor. And if we continue with this labor, it would be a fruit in ways that perhaps we can't even contemplate now. I mean, even if we were looking back at about 10, 15 years ago, perhaps we wouldn't be seeing these scholarships that we're seeing now. So we don't need to, be, looking for a specific act in and of itself. And if that act does not occur, it somehow violates, or betrays or undermines or somehow, cast as a failure, the reparation momentum. okay? Because history doesn't stop, okay? The future goes on. And so the legitimacy lies in the struggle. And once we continue that struggle, then for the generations to come, their future is much more assured than if we stop the struggle.
I would say to you that Caribbean people as a whole are more aware of what is reparations and the need. In the Caribbean Examinations Council, CXC, Cape, students do reparations as a topic for the last 10 years or so. At the University of the West Indies, all campuses, persons who are not studying history, they also study about reparations, particularly lawyers, because lawyers are the ones who will have to fight the case. And we anticipate that one fine day, a group of excellent lawyers who have come from the university system would be part of this. So you have thousands and thousands of people who have been educated in the region about what reparations is and so on. Not just people who are into history and culture and so on. Now, I always make the point that in the UK, by the mid to late 18th century, 1750, 1760, 1770, the average person in Britain was not in favor of enslavement. In fact, when we think about the Garifuna, there is sufficient evidence that people in Britain protested against the treatment of the Garifuna. They protested from the very first war, what we know in the new text that we're writing called the War for Sovereignty, the Garifuna War for Sovereignty and the Second War for Sovereignty. They protested. They didn't like what was going on. And it is that movement that gave speed or growth to the humanitarianism, right? And if you add the humanitarians to the rise of the industrialists, people who put money into factories in England, and the resistance by the enslaved themselves, those who burned down the cane fields, poisoned the animals, who Richard Hart, the Jamaican scholar, called the slaves who abolished slavery, or C.L.R. James, the black Jacobins, those black people in Haiti who had the same philosophy as the whites in France who were called the Jacobins, hence the black Jacobins. The point is that reparations as a movement is gaining steam. That there are people, and Grace could come in the UK, who are seeing this, because don't forget, the UK is not just white people now. The UK, they are multiracial, multicultural. You have black people, you have Indian, you have Chinese, etc., etc., and they all have the same kind of political power as everyone. Grace, you want to comment?
Yeah, no, you're right. I would say there have been, in the UK, perhaps the very early stages of institutions engaging in reparatory justice, particularly universities, as we discussed, as University in Wales, we've seen Glasgow University, and some other institutions just do that sort of start to engage in the process. I would like to see the British government engage in the process of reparations. If you think that until 2015, the British government was still paying off that debt that they paid to the enslavers back at the time of emancipation, it's a very recent history. I think, though, realistically, with the whole politics involved in perhaps the British government engaging, I wonder whether, as an institution, the British monarchy, given its involvement in the transatlantic slave trade and in slavery, perhaps as an institution may be pressured into catching up somewhat with some of the other institutions in the UK that are slowly starting to engage in that process of reparatory justice.
Okay, so there are the scholarships that are being offered now. What other ways, what other methods can be used to help to repair?
Well, CARICOM has come up with what you call a 10-point plan. And Prime Minister Dr. Rob Gonsalves, he was the head of the CARICOM subcommittee on this. And the 10-point plan is very clear, very clear. There are not specific clauses in this about money, it's about action. So we're talking about developing your technological capacities, expanding your educational opportunities. So if you take St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we don't have a university. Well, once upon a time, our university was the sixth form college that that Dr. Didentier sat in, and I remember the days used to peek through the window and say, one day I'll be in there. But fortunately enough, when my time came, you got a little scholarship and you go away. And we still have to send our people all over to Taiwan, Haiti, every day. What is wrong with we having a small university could at least deal with 100, 200 people in specific areas, not in everything, right? In the most dire needs. We have, for example, a nursing school, but we could have our own little medical thing, you know, where we could train people. So development aid. We have also the legacies, the psychological damage. The psychological damage, and that's the one that makes me most sad about St. Vincent, because sometimes I am speaking to people and the things they're telling you that they believe in, you marvel. You marvel. Right? As I said earlier, the thing, people still calling people big nose and calling you black boy and so on. You know? These are legacies of enslavement. So assistance to build confidence in yourself, to respect what you have, your own resources. Not to be looking and see, oh, the American hamburger, and you don't want either a fried breadfruit or fried banana. What is wrong with it? Nothing is wrong with it. But because all of the time you've been projected this image. So for example, to increase your media, we don't make movies. We can't see our own people on screen. Every night we turn on the TV, we see white people. Huh? We see white people, every time we turn on, we can't get to see a good movie and go a good laugh with something Caribbean and so on. So things like these. It's a 10-point plan, and it's all about improving the Caribbean civilization and celebrating what is the Caribbean with the assistance of the aid of Britain, France, Spain, the Netherlands, all of those countries who benefited from slavery and colonization.
Yeah, that vocabulary of dehumanization that Dr. Scott has pointed to has been a powerful weapon in perpetuating this kind of alienation from a kind of embrace of the just fundamental beauty, quality, and purity of blackness, of that all persons are of the same value. You had a language that was developed and that was passed on for generations, and that has not been easy to remove. And in a way, we Brother Bob did say, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. And so, so it seems to me that in some of these instances, we will have to do it ourselves. Okay, we will have to do it ourselves. That granted, there are many areas in which we need collaboration with the former enslavers or the descendants of the former enslavers. But there are other areas where we have to step up to the plate and recognize that we have to liberate ourselves.
I think that's a perfect note on which to end. You seem to have something else to...
No, I just want to say to the viewers that we are not talking about throwing out the baby but the bath water. There are things that we have inherited from British colonization or French colonization or European culture,
like cricket,
which is part of us. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about. But what we are saying is that we need help to celebrate, and we need to have the capacity to keep what is good and get rid of what is bad.
Okay.
I agree.
Great. Well, time is running out. That's our program for today. Thank you so much to our esteemed guests, my classmate, Professor Denny, my good friend, Dr. Cleve Scott, and of course our guest from the UK, Dr. Grace Carrigan. Thank all three of you for your contributions. I'm sure you'll be back in the studio in person again sometime soon. That's the program for today. See you again next week, Wednesday at the same time, same place. Good evening and thank you.